Star Trek Generations is a Jenga tower after you've been playing for 45 minutes. Every plot point is a load-bearing one, and when you try to remove one or change it slightly, everything falls apart. This guy wants to go back to space heaven, where you can have whatever life you like. Why can't he find the floating space ribbon and fly into it? Because any ship it comes into contact with explodes. Except for the Enterprise B, it has to make contact so Kirk can go to space heaven. It can't blow up because Doohan was one of the only TOS actors who agreed to be in the movie, and we already know he doesn't die. So the plot made an exception for the Enterprise B. And it made an exception for the ship Guinan and Soran were on, since it was floating in and out of the Nexus. Guinan tells Picard she spent decades trying to forget how awesome the Nexus was, but it takes Picard about 3 minutes to be ready to leave, and it doesn't take much longer to convince Kirk to help him. Why is it so hard for immortals to leave, but mortals can do it just fine? That bothered me even when I was a kid. Why are the Duras sisters in this movie? Soran needs a special element to implode the sun to change the gravity in this galaxy to alter the course of the ribbon so it will hit a planet he's on and suck him into the Nexus because he can't get into the Nexus from a ship except for all the times you could. And he needs the Duras sisters to help him steal this element from some Romulans. He needs the element to get what he wants. They need it to conquer the Klingon Empire. Seems simple enough, except this movie's already a mess with one villain, and if you never watched Next Generation, you're probably confused why the movie expects you to know who these two are. But the movie really wants to crash the Enterprise into the planet, and you can't do that without an external threat causing the crash. So while Picard is engaged with Soran, we need other villains to crash the ship. Why are the Duras sisters trying to destroy the Enterprise? Will crashing the Enterprise help with conquering the Klingon Empire? You have what you want. You're cloaked. You can leave and accomplish your goals and let Soran do his thing. If you hate these guys so much for all the times that you cross swords with them in TNG, go conquer the Klingon Empire, and then you can come back with a gigantic army and destroy the Enterprise when you know you can defeat them. Soran sends the thing into the sun, which begins the implosion. Then he kidnaps Geordi and asks what he knows about trilithium. Then they send him back to the Enterprise in exchange for Picard going to talk to Soran. But Geordi's visor was bugged, so the Duras sisters can see the shield frequency and shoot through the shields. Was Soran only pretending to need to know about trilithium? No, because the Duras sisters ask if he got the information he needed, and they should know he already knows what he needs to know. But you can't remove this nonsensical portion of the movie because they wanted to crash the Enterprise into a planet since TNG Season 2. I'm not the first person to point this out, but let's talk about Kirk and Picard's team-up. Picard goes into the Nexus. Phantom Guinan tells Picard he can go anywhere and any-when. After convincing Kirk to help him stop Soran, they go back to the planet, like 10 seconds before Soran launches the nuke. But if Picard can go any-when and anywhere, again, I'm not the first person to suggest this, stop Soran from stealing the trilithium. Put him in the brig when he's on the Enterprise. None of that needed Kirk's assistance, but Soran has to send the nuke so Picard can be in the Nexus, and they have to be able to access any time and place so they can undo the sending of the nuke. And Picard has to be high on stupid pills so that he chooses the worst possible time he could try to stop Soran, because the entire movie exists to have Kirk and Picard team up. William Shakespeare and Homer's love child couldn't spin gold out of the straw producer Rick Berman was handing out, like wanting to finally crash the ship or passing the baton from the original series to the Next Generation, which we already did, thrice, in TNG. We just finished 7 years of these guys doing their Trek thing. We did not need Kirk to boldly go where half the TOS cast has gone before, and Undiscovered Country is the best send-off to the original series you could do. But if you have to have a team-up movie, here's what I would do. In real life, DeForest Kelley could not get health insurance to be in the movie, so we can't use Bones. George Takei did not want Sulu to go from captaining his own ship to being a helmsman under Kirk again, understandably, so we can't use Sulu. And Leonard Nimoy might have come back if they had given him better dialogue that couldn't literally be handed off to Scotty with no changes. I wouldn't even try to do a send-off to the TOS crew, since balancing something like 13 main characters would be very difficult. Instead, since Berman wants a passing of the baton, I would just worry about doing a farewell to Kirk, and let Undiscovered Country be our farewell to the crew as a whole. I still don't think we needed a passing of the baton, but if Rick Berman is paying the bills, and he says we're doing that, this is the best way to make that work. So, what would I do differently? First, let's talk about what I would not do. Data's emotion chip. It's incredibly annoying, and it ties in with none of the rest of the movie. You could say when Picard tells Data it takes courage to face your emotions, that kind of ties in with Picard having to soldier on even though he's lost his family, but that's a stretch. And since the later movies ignore Data keeping his emotion chip anyway, that makes it even easier for us to ignore it here. We open in 2293. Sulu's daughter is on the ship, just like in the movie, and this ties in with Kirk being pensive about missed opportunities with his own family. Kirk is still the captain, which is a talking point among the crew. Kirk tried retirement briefly after Undiscovered Country, and he hated it. So he pulled some strings to get himself back in the captain's chair. He asked the rest of the TOS crew to join him, and they said no. Their lives are going in different directions. It's time for them to move on. Some of them are getting teaching positions at the academy, or becoming ambassadors, or becoming captains themselves. It was weird that Chekhov was second in command of his own ship and went back to being like fifth in line on the Enterprise. They still keep in touch with their old friends, but they recognize it's not the 1960s anymore. It's time for them to move on. Kirk wants to recreate the old days, and he might ponder about how his friends have a point about his behavior, but he can't because he and his crew get a priority message from Starfleet that one Tolian Soran is on the loose and needs to be captured. The El-Arians were killed and or assimilated about 30 years before the beginning of Generations, so Soran is still pretty sore about that. Or Soran about that. And he wants to save his people. He's also stuck in the past, though this is fairly understandable. He's heard rumors about time portals on certain worlds, like the city on the edge of forever. Him being a scientist, maybe he can manipulate the portal to take him to a specific moment in time so he can warn his people danger is coming. Sounds like something someone else should have done. The crew is able to intercept Soran just in the nick of time. Time, get it? Soran set up a bomb to blow up the portal so he can't be followed, and it will destroy the Enterprise if it goes off. So Kirk goes down to stop the bomb. It does go off, but it only destroys the portal and not the Enterprise. Jump forward 78 years, Picard's family is still dead, but instead of him acting like he's sad because there will be no more important Picards doing important stuff like they have throughout history, what if he was actually sad because his family died? Just a thought. The Enterprise approaches the planet from the beginning of the movie, and they catch a faint signal from an old Federation beacon. The bomb detonated just above the atmosphere, and the fallout blocked the signal from Enterprise B, so they couldn't know it was going off. But in the last few decades, the fallout cleared, and the signal is clear too. We find out this wasn't a time portal like City on the Edge of Forever, but something like what the Telosians had going on in the Menagerie, where they grant you your greatest wish. The misunderstanding from Soran came because they can essentially pause time for whoever comes to them, or make you think you're in a different time. They don't have many guests, but some of them may be centuries old. You can tease an ethical dilemma. Are these willing guests, or are they prisoners unaware that their surroundings aren't real? And should we free them if reality is going to be much worse than what they think is real? Somehow Soran will grab a phaser from one of the away team and stuns them all, and takes a transporter badge. He beams aboard the Enterprise and, using science bad buttery, commandeers the ship. Instead of the El-Arians being unable to let go of being in the Nexus, the opposite is true. If they are so intuitive, Soran is probably the only one on this planet who knew what he was experiencing wasn't real. He plans to take the Enterprise and, using the swing around the sun method from TOS, travel back to before the Borg assimilated the El-Arians and warn his people. Then we get more ethical quandaries. Guinan is on the Enterprise, and she remembers Soran. She says, yeah, I would love it if my people were still alive, but you can't do that. You could radically change history, and maybe not for the better. Soran says he's had decades to consider that, and he doesn't care. We get some action on the ship, whoever wasn't on the away team trying to retake the ship before Soran can go back in time while not endangering his hostages. Back on the planet, when our away team wakes up, the not Telosians have given them their heart's desires. Picard's nephew, his brother, and sister-in-law, they show up. Jean-Luc, want to see the new vineyard? Worf gets word the Klingons are willing to reinstate the House of Mogh. A doctor approaches Geordi and says they can talk about procedures so he won't have to wear the visor anymore. Beverly's husband is here. You can play around with this for a little bit. Draw it out while the people on the ship are trying to stall Soran. Eventually, Data figures out a way to send a message to the away team that somehow, I don't know how, gets through to them even when they're in their fantasies. And this will be when they run into Kirk. It low-key made me very upset that they gave Kirk his alleged happy ending, and it's with some chick we've never heard of before. Apparently, they did try to make this be Carol Marcus, but the studio said no for reasons I cannot fathom. In all of Kirk's liaisons, Carol always seems special. And if I may borrow a page from Van by Night, if the Nexus gave Kirk a recreation of the family he lost, that would parallel Picard losing his family. This would fit amazingly with what the movie was already doing, so I cannot believe the studio shut this down. But if you can't do that, do what Mount Scott Catwork said. The Nexus makes Kirk think he stopped the bomb, he saved the Enterprise, he gets a call from Starfleet, we're letting you keep this ship indefinitely, your old crew is happy to go on adventures with you, and the Romulans need to be stopped. Can you do that? Kirk doesn't know it's not real, where in the movie, he does, at least when prodded by Picard, but he doesn't care. One of the away team remembers reading about the details of Kirk's final mission, how he was chasing a potentially deadly threat to all time and space, which they now know is the guy who took the Enterprise. Kirk probably has insights on this guy that would help them stop Soran, but then they return to their dilemma of if they should tell Kirk this is not real. If he came back, what is there for him nearly 100 years after everyone thought he was dead? Would Kirk be happy if they took him away from here? Picard especially does not want to take Kirk away from his family, as Picard has now had to lose his family twice and absolutely wants to find some other way off this planet to stop Soran without it involving taking Kirk away from Paradise. Before a decision can be made, the away team gets a garbled message from Data saying they managed to retake the ship from Soran, but he sabotaged the ship somehow, so it's going down. And just like that, the Enterprise crashes, and presumably everyone on board dies. The crash shakes up the Not-Telosians enough that they temporarily lose control of their guests, and Kirk recognizes the away team as Starfleet. The uniforms are different, but he can still tell who they are. They reveal what they were trying to do, and even though it's a lot to take in, Kirk accepts that none of this was real. Somebody, not sure if it should be Kirk or Picard, realizes the Not-Telosians could probably bend time and space enough to allow them to go back in time and stop Soran before he crashes the ship. If they're able to halt the passage of time for their guests and even recreate an entire time period based on the desires of their guests, it's a stretch, but maybe they can help set this right. The Not-Telosians are a little resistant. Why should we help you? Your presence here already endangered us and our guests. It will be very dangerous for us to re-establish psychic contact with them and help ease them back into the Matrix. But they're convinced if your entire goal is to help people, help the away team save however many hundreds of people were on that ship. So they reverse time and space a little, sending the away team and Kirk onto the Enterprise a few minutes before it crashes. Oh, and total fan service money shot, but I would want Kirk to see Worf and say, "Do I know you?" You know, a reference to Worf's grandfather helping Kirk and McCoy in Undiscovered Country. Anyway, then we see some of the same action scenarios we saw the people on the ship doing earlier, but this time they play out slightly differently since Kirk and the away team are there to help out. Kirk and Picard are able to corner Soran and prevent him from crashing the ship, and they manage to beam him down to the planet. It may be CW flashy, but they figure if the Not-Telosians can readjust their frequency they use to create their simulations, they can fool Soran into thinking he's succeeded. Immoral? Maybe, but they reason if they take Soran to a regular space prison, he will be too dangerous and might try this again. And at least this way, he's happy. At least that's the plan they worked out before taking the ship back from Soran. But Kirk gets wounded in the chaos. I don't know how I would make this work, but I would want to echo what Kirk said in Final Frontier about how he knows that whenever he dies, he will be alone. And that's about all I have. This fulfills Rick Berman's bizarre orders to crash the Enterprise in at least one timeline that was later prevented, and it unnecessarily passes the baton. Hopefully the minutia works a little better than the nonsense the movie gave us. Hopefully you guys like this one, and if you did, I'll be back in the future with more videos. Until then, have a good one.